Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome everyone back to the second part of our symposium today, Next Normal, Ideas for the Future. We had a really wonderful conversation this morning with our panel, and we're looking forward to an equally great conversation this afternoon. Before we launch into that, I'm going to bring on my co-moderator for the day, Alysia Lee, who will be moderating the panel with me, and Alicia's gonna fill you in a little bit, give you a few bullets, summing up what we heard this morning before we go into our presentation and then into our panel. So over to you, Alysia.
Thank you so much, Fred. Hi, everyone. My name is Alysia Lee, and I use she and her pronouns, and I'm joining you from my home in Baltimore City on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway Conoy. This morning, was it a morning or late morning? We had such a great panel discussion, really lively, and I've captured a few bullets and threads that I'm excited to share. So we were examining, as we will continue to do this afternoon, the role of the arts and the arts education sector in advancing racial equity and preparing us all for a liberated world. Garrett McQueen, one of my favorite humans, challenged us to consider a renewed and decolonized arts ecosystem, one that recognizes the impact and legacy of Black and Brown people, and that invites artistic innovation. And he also challenged us to consider how each of us are doing our part. And throughout the conversation, you could tell that folks really listened and took Garrett's message and his sharing about his work through Triloquy very internally, right? And we talked about doing our part both as individuals. We talked about the value of collectivism and working together. We talked about institutional movement. We saw lots of conversation about where each of us are on this spectrum in terms of investigating ID, E, and A. Mark Bamuthi Joseph from the Kennedy Center helped us to remember the singular nature of each of these, that diversity often, when done correctly, can lead us to inclusion, right? But they are separate missions, they are separate goals, right? And inclusion, oftentimes now folks are really speaking more towards belonging, can lead us towards thinking about access. And all of these together with other things can lead us to start thinking about equity, but really separating them out and not allowing ourselves to get so caught up in the acronym that we speed through. We talked about all of the different ways that we've seen equity kind of scaffold in the work. The Kennedy Center shared their cartography project. We had phenomenal speakers from the University of Michigan, Louise Toppin, talk about some of the ways that her academic institution is using repertoire and audition requirements to encourage diversity. Same, Damien Sneed gave similar sharings from the Manhattan School in the ways that they're thinking about repertoire and diversity. We also then started to talk about power. And Eric Liu, of course, his name came up and he's shared with us and with the world that power is an infinite resource. And so Stephanie Ybarra invoked in quite a few authors in the presentation this morning. We talked about the need to distribute power, the need to focus on our vocabulary as we do so. So how are we thinking about the words outreach, empower, uplift, when we're connecting with marginalized folks who have been intentionally marginalized, not just historically, but also in the present day? What does that repair look like? And finally, we started to dig into the linkages of capitalism and patriarchy and racism and understand that this is a daunting task to untangle these and eliminate them from our cultural beliefs and our institutions. But also, we considered the strength of artists and the artistic community, the habits of mind that we've all developed by being creators, people who create something from nothing, people who utilize empty spaces and create transformative experiences, remembering our power, our infinite power in this work, right? As we bring into mind some of our artistic practices and think about the transferable skills for revolution, things like reflection, community and connection, these transferable skills. And we ended the session thinking about our dream for the future. And Mark reminded us to, as we dream, to dream finitely, to dream with clarity, to dream with specificity as we shoot towards that dream. Practical skills were shared, practical strategies like sharing, being transparent about salaries, elevating the audition requirements, remembering Black feminist thinkers and inviting their philosophies into the work, and of course, building a theory of change, a pedagogy, if you will, around the ways that we operate institutionally and collectively. So really being sure to guide ourselves from a mission-centric, value-centric vision, explicit vision place as we activate ourselves in this work. It was a really great conversation. Now, we also talked about this concept of systemic allyship, and that really dovetails right into our conversation this afternoon. We talked about programming and practices exemplifying these IDEA values, right? But we also talked about pedagogy, which I just mentioned, and pipeline, the pathways, how people come into the work. And I think that has a lot to do with, of course, the panel that we have assembled here, where we're going to begin the conversation talking about training and education and the landscape that prepares people for professional work. So as we jump into that, I want to remind us that this morning, one nugget that was shared was this idea of arts institutions in an effort to be more equitable. I like to use the word humanistic, to center human beings. In an effort to do that, and specifically targeting and thinking about racial justice or racial equity as the strategy to achieve that humanistic goal, Mark Bamuthi Joseph from the Kennedy Center reminded us or encouraged us to think about the performance as not being the end all, that the process, that it's a part of a process that maybe has a longer arc, right? Maybe the performance is the middle of a process that is centered around civic engagement and dialogue. But how can communities enter in if the final piece of the strategy that we're using to engage is the performance, right? Where does the performance sit? And in doing so, that's for us to think, I think, that dovetails right into our conversation about how do we think about what needs to be in place as we prepare visionary artistic leadership from all of the students, right? We prepare our students to be visionary artistic leaders. That does not mean to me that you lead an arts institution, but that you have an artistic pathway as a part of your journey, right? If they're engaging with many of the institutions that are here today, they have artistic habits of mind, right? And how does that shift the way that they'll be able to show up as leaders in community? So I'm really excited about the conversation today. We're going to start with a short presentation from Alexander Lloyd Blake, who is a conductor, a composer, an arranger, a singer, and the founding artistic director of Tonality. And he's going to share with us about creating social justice concepts. Enjoy the presentation.